need to be able to build enough homes for them, and Australia is massively failing at that. And unfortunately for Australians, it's most likely not going to get better. The only way out...
Hello guys, what's up? How are you? This is Wasim Shaukat. I hope you are well. Today we are talking about the dark side of Australia. Everyone know the Australia is beautiful country and beautiful weather. Today we are talking about a video who explain the dark side of Australia. Okay, let's start the video.
It's a bit of a paradox. Australia is one of the richest countries in the world with one of the highest average wages, and also one of the emptiest, with just 3 people per square kilometer. A simple logic should dictate that with a wealthy population and vast empty spaces, it should also have abundant and affordable housing. But in reality, it's the exact opposite. Australia has one of the least affordable housing in the world, and it has been going through a devastating housing crisis that keeps getting worse and worse. Sydney, the capital, is now the second most unaffordable city after Hong Kong, and 3 other major Australian cities are in the top 20. And the problem is that this crisis is not going anywhere, because Australia has locked itself, its housing market, and its economy into a trap of its own making, that it can't really get out of, and that's going to be increasingly more painful to be in. So this is why no one can afford to live in Australia anymore. But first, you might want to hear about the paid partner of this video, which is BetterHelp. What BetterHelp does is to connect you with a credentialed therapist who's there to listen and help you work on and improve your mental health. For me, it was through BetterHelp that I actually tried therapy for the very first time a couple of weeks ago, and I've been using it ever since. Because it's all online, it's a lot more accessible, and it takes out a lot of the barriers of finding a therapist. You don't actually have to go anywhere or talk to anyone in person. The sessions are done through video calls, which is what I do, phone calls, or even texts, and you can book them for whenever you want. They have over 30,000 therapists in their network, and if you want to change your therapist, you can easily do that, at any point and for whatever reason. From my experience, talking to someone about how I feel helps a lot in making me less stressed and anxious. And if I don't have to go anywhere in person, I find it a lot easier to stick to it. So if you think you can benefit from therapy as well, consider trying BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/explainedwithdom to get 10% off for your first month. And now, back to the video. But first, let's explain how important housing is to Australians. Because while having a home is important for everyone, in the land down under, it's literally part of the national identity. Since the 1950s, owning a home, or rather a house, has been the ultimate sign that you made it, a symbol of stability, security, and affluence. While the American dream was about getting to the top with nothing but your hard work, in the Australian version, or the Great Australian Dream, what gets you there is not so much hard work, but rather owning a house. And according to polls, for 75% of Australians, this is still very much the idea. But unfortunately, that Australian dream is now as dead as it could be, at least for most people. And to show why, let's explain how unaffordable housing in Australia has actually become. In 1970, the average nationwide salary was $4,200 per year, and the average house price in Sydney was $18,700. And so you needed to save up 4.5 years of an average salary to buy an average house. Since then, the average salary went up quite a lot, and it's now at $74,000, so it's 17 times higher than 50 years ago. Which is great, except that in the meantime, the average house price in Sydney went all the way up to somewhere around 1.5 million, 80 times higher than back then. And so now, you would need to save your entire annual salary for more than 20 years to buy an average house, which in the meantime would likely increase in price anyway. And it's not just Sydney, but basically all the major Australian cities are showing a similar trend. And while that's great if you bought a property back then and kept it till now, because that was probably the best investment you could ever make, it also makes it extremely unaffordable for everyone else. Today, an Australian household that earns $105,000 can only comfortably afford 13% of homes on the market. And even the people that can afford to buy a property have to take on a huge mortgage to do so, which is why Australian households have one of the largest debts in the world. And while homes have been getting progressively more expensive over the past 5 decades, the pace really picked up since the year 2000, and even more in the past 5 years. And today, Sydney is the second most unaffordable city, second only to Hong Kong, and 4 of the largest Australian cities that are home to roughly 60% of Australia's population are in the top 20. The average household now needs 10 years to save up for 20% down payment on an average house. But since the house price will likely increase much faster than their income, it's possible that it would take them much longer than that, or that they will never actually be able to save up enough money. And so the country where home ownership has always been the main priority is now also a country where buying a house is basically impossible for the majority of people. But why is that? Well, the good news is that it wouldn't have to be that way, and Australia could fix this trend. But the bad news is that that's probably not gonna happen, and the situation is instead gonna get a lot worse. So let's explain. So the reasons for Australia's housing crisis are actually stupidly simple, and at the bottom of it, it's a problem of supply and demand. In the beginning, we said that Australia, being such a large country, should naturally have an abundance of cheap land to build cheap homes on. Even if we take away the inland part of Australia that's mostly empty and not well suited for life, the Australian coastline where most people live is still much bigger than most of Europe. But the problem is that in Australia, unlike in most places, an overwhelming majority of people are concentrated in just a very few places. Almost 90% of Australians live in cities, 72% live in the few major ones, and over 40% live in just the 2 largest. In other words, even though Australia is huge and land supply should be almost unlimited, almost everyone wants to live in the same tiny area of a few major cities, where the supply of available land is naturally limited. And since the rate of urbanization in Australia keeps going up, this is only going to get worse. But even if everyone wants to live in the same few places, it should still be a manageable issue. Except that the large Australian cities are doing everything they can to make it completely impossible. If you have a limited space and potentially unlimited number of people who want to live there, you would probably want to make that place as dense as possible. But that's the opposite of what's happening. Instead of building dense neighborhoods that can actually house a lot of people, the large Australian cities are building single-family homes and ever more sprawling suburban neighborhoods. But the problem is that you just can't build enough of those to accommodate all the people that are moving into those cities, as there just isn't enough available land. Melbourne has already spread out over an area that's 6 times larger than London, despite having roughly half of its population. But even so, there aren't enough homes being built, and so the supply side is even more limited. And on the other hand, the demand is getting bigger and bigger. And while this is affected by a number of factors, from favorable tax breaks that incentivize buying investment property to low interest rates that make it easy to borrow money to do that, at the end of the day, the growing demand comes down to growing population. More people naturally need more homes to live in, and Australia is having a lot more people every year. Most of it thanks to immigration. The country, with a population of 26 million, grows by roughly 400,000 people per year, which means that the population of Australia has been growing almost twice as fast as in Canada or the United States, and 4 times faster than in France or the Netherlands. Now, this might sound like a rant against immigration, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm a big proponent of economic immigration. Attracting large numbers of qualified, educated, and hardworking immigrants is how countries get rich. And Australia has been actually approaching immigration in a fairly pragmatic way, despite the large numbers, thanks to its immigration system that's only letting in people that have the exact qualification the country needs at a given moment. And so it has been able to leverage immigration for the maximum economic benefit. But nevertheless, having such high levels of immigration naturally stimulates the demand for more housing. In other words, if you want to have a lot of people coming in, you need to be able to build enough homes for them. And Australia is massively failing at that. And unfortunately for Australians, it's most likely not going to get better. The only way out of this crisis is to balance the demand and supply, which would either mean massively restricting its immigration or hugely increasing how many homes Australia is building. But neither is likely to happen. On the demand side, Australia cannot really decrease the immigration, or at least not in any significant way, because its economy is dependent on it. Australia needs the labor force to keep its most important industries working. It needs international students to keep coming in and paying their university fees to sustain the education sector. And it needs the ever-increasing number of consumers for the economy to keep growing. By 2050, Australia is projected to have 38 million people, and the migrants will be a key driving force of the economy. And according to this study, it's the high rates of immigration that protected the Australian economy for 3 decades from recessions that damaged Europe or the US. In other words, Australia's future survival is clearly dependent on maintaining high levels of qualified immigration, and without it, its economy would almost certainly suffer. And so the only other option is to simply build more in the few cities where everyone wants to live, and that means building much more high-density housing and less single-family homes. But that's very unlikely to happen, mostly because Australians actually don't want that. The Australian dream of everyone owning a house is still very much alive, as the demand on the market is still mostly for single-family homes, and the number of permits given out for high-density housing is actually going down, while Australia is not building nearly enough homes that it would need. In other words, the desire for the traditional symbol of success is not going anywhere. But with less space and more people, it will become increasingly more expensive, making housing more costly and less affordable for everyone.
So guys, here is the news about the dark side of Australia. I've been explain it very well. What's about this video you're taking? Please tell me in comment section. Okay, if you like the video, press the like button and subscribe to this channel.